Welcome. This is Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Today, we're going to be talking with Florence Klein about her memoir, Under the Hat, and the memoir of an unstoppable woman. First, I want to thank the sponsors of Something to Talk About, which are the Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers memory care, and they offer assisted living, and they offer independent living. They've just opened independent living facilities up on Rolling Bay, and I invite you to take a look. They're offering tours. I'll give you a phone number here where you can call to schedule a tour or find out more about Fieldstone Communities. 360-594-1010. Also, we like to acknowledge as we begin these meetings that we are gathering on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on these waters of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and we are grateful for their hospitality. So yes, today we're going to be talking about Florence Klein's book, Under the Hat. And she has quite a life story, and we're grateful that she took the effort to put it down on paper. We were talking a little bit before we got started, Flo, about the idea that although you have had press coverage in the past, the idea of writing a memoir is a very vulnerable experience. Do you want to say a little bit about that? And welcome.
Thank you. Originally, I didn't write to start a memoir. I've always been writing. And the original notes I kept was called Don't Look for Kindness. And so it was after a couple years of just writing all during the time that I was working, I was just taking notes and writing chapters or pages, I guess. And it was under Don't Look for Kindness. But then I started one day, one of my friends here on Bainbridge said, well, I have something for you. There's a little book, and it's called If You Could Write a Memoir in 30 Days and Have It Published Right Away. I said, oh, that sounds good. I went down to Mexico and tried, and I got up to, I guess, day 23 and came back to Bainbridge Island and realized, well, time was getting short. I think I better go and really get this memoir started. And still thinking that it really wasn't a memoir. I was just going to do Don't Look for Kindness. I got found an editor and started in January 2020. And that's when I realized that it changed its name and it came into a different format.
So do you think that there was a chapter or a topic, a part of your life that you started to write about that helped you realize that you were going to be doing something different than what you thought, that it was going to be a memoir rather than Don't Look for Kindness?
Yes, definitely. I realized there was much more than just a memoir of my life and my family, but I wanted it for a broader distribution. And one of the first things that the editors said to me, well, what do you want it for? And who do you want it for? And so I realized that I wanted to certainly be an inspiration and a help to people 60 and plus, but I also feel that I wanted it for the Z generation, which is 19 to 29 or 32.
So you were thinking that maybe as you looked at your life, you'd learned a couple things that were worth sharing with folks who were trying to make sense of it at the beginning of their careers.
Yes.
So one of the things that you write about in the book, you mentioned that you didn't feel as though you faced any particular obstacles as a woman in business. But when I read it, I felt like there were a lot of hints in the narrative that you did have to push at certain times in your career, as everyone does, I guess, but particularly against, you know, entering what seemed to be, you mentioned a couple of times, being in organizations where you were the only woman in the room. Do you feel as though you ended up having to play on the boys' team to succeed in business as a woman?
No, I really don't think I felt that I had to play on the boys' team, because starting with Robinson and Company in the first brokerage firm that I went to, the only thing I can recall, which is in the book, of course, is when I was in training, there was about 6. This was a small firm, Robinson and Company, and when I was in training, the short, heavy-set man sat on a high pedestal and quick to speak, and he was very dismissive of me, and he really didn't appreciate a woman in the class. But I was there, and I had, was taking the course, and so that was that. And all the entire time that I was in Robinson, I was the only woman. And when I moved to Beige, which was Beige Halsey Stewart, I still was the only woman in the firm, and fully registered and all. And then when I moved to Kidder Peabody, there was a woman who had licenses, but she was in a very segregated area.
So this is your time as a stockbroker, and you started out in some types of business that were not. I mean, you tell the story about how there are areas that were pretty much reserved for men who were in charge of the firm, and you tried really hard to get those lines of business. Say a little bit more about that.
That was when after I moved into the boardroom, which was a little bit of a harassment, because I started out in financial planning, which was a new field. Financial planning, 1965, was not around, and it wasn't worked on or done. So that's why I was interested in actually going to Robinson. Then when they closed, then I moved to Beige, and it was an interesting place, and it was on top of Woolworths 5 and 10. But on the side of the room was a group of men, and I said, "Oh, what are they doing?" And my manager said, "Oh, they're institutional brokers." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I thought about it. I said, "Oh," and of course it was still all men. And so then they said, "Oh, well, you really don't want to do that." Well, I don't know about having anyone tell me I can't do something. And so very quietly, I sat back in my desk, and this was there maybe a year or 6 months. And I found that I could call institutional brokers. I was licensed, and I started out with savings and loans. And so all of a sudden, or suddenly, I was an institutional broker. And they sort of didn't know what to say, as long as I was making the commissions and bringing in the client. And then I had all the savings and loans associations in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and in Maryland too. And then I branched out from there into state of Pennsylvania and Maryland and federal government firms.
So
and
your
institutions.
solution to the problem was to try to prospect for another area where you weren't competing directly, and then it was hard to argue with success. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair. The question, they said, well, most institutional brokers, and that is still true today, get their calls or their leads from corporations that are dealing with a particular firm. And so the firm assigns these corporations to the broker. And I think that is still done today. So normally someone doesn't go out and find their own clients, perhaps, but also institutional brokers that are substantial.
Now, one of the things you also talk about is that you decided consciously, and I'm sure this is true with a lot of women, how to dress, because you needed to dress for success, but also stand out. And the title of Under the Hat talks a little bit about that.
I always wore a hat all day and still do, and enjoyed it. And actually, to talk about women and men in the business, I had my own set of rules. And I didn't go out to lunch. And at that time, martinis, the men would go out for late lunch or lunch and come back late, or go out to dinner. And so I never did either of those. And I had 3 children, young enough at the beginning, especially, that I had to get home to. And I didn't find any pressure that I had to go out to lunch or go out to dinner or make an after date. So as far as dressing, I wore a suit, hat. I didn't wear pants, I guess. No. So
Yeah, you mentioned that you didn't do that. And of course, around here, I only seem to be wearing short pants this time of year, but it was a completely different. I think about that. The idea that, when I was reading that, I thought, I tend to try to dress very casually in my job at the senior center, with the idea of projecting a relaxed sort of attitude about the feeling here at the center. And when I was reading your book, I thought about how you were presenting both some flair so that you were noticed and remembered, but also playing within the rules of wearing a business suit and wearing a skirt, because that again would sort of counter any objections, I guess. And maybe you also just enjoyed it.
I did and do. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, one of the things that you have that we were just been talking about is your application of yourself, but you also note some privileges that you enjoyed. Can you talk about the openings in your life as a younger professional that allowed you to explore those goals and dreams?
Well, I had a very supportive husband, and he didn't object when I had to go out, when I first started out, at night to visit clients. And eventually, so sometimes I would come home for dinner with the children and then go out afterwards. And eventually, because I was going to different areas of Philadelphia or the suburbs, I took my dog at Len's suggestion in the car to be supportive. And so I would go out at night then.
And that's part of that financial planning work, right? So you were trying to meet with couples at a time when they had time for you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that started out. in the first 5 or 7 years in Robinson. And then when I moved to Bay Shawsey Stewart, which is now Prudential company. Yes.
So how did you, I mean, the next part of your career involved some property development. How did that come to pass?
I was living in the suburbs, and I wanted and had to either drive in during beautiful drive or take a train. And as the children got older, I decided I wanted to live in town. And where Beige and where the firms were. And so I started to look around, and I looked around and decided that I wanted to live in Old City, Philadelphia. And as I found 1 or 2 places, and then I found something after a couple of years or 2 years or so, I found one that I put together a team, and we bought something right in Old City, Philadelphia, facing the water. And before it was built, I had an offer to sell it. I was sort of the managing person in that group. And then that was the first project I started, but I still didn't have a place to live because I was looking to actually move in town. Finally, I found the chocolate factory, which was originally Marketan's candy, known for the best buttercreams. And I found the chocolate factory, and it's over 100 years old. And it still had, when we went to see it, the big double oak desks. That was, unusual at that time. And that started the development, and I developed the chocolate factory. And then as I walked around in Old City, I got hooked and went and found other properties that were dilapidated or needed repair and needed restoration, and I developed them.
So that became pretty much the bulk of your work at that point in your life, right?
No, I was still a broker.
So you just didn't have any, you just didn't have any downtime.
Excuse me?
You didn't have any downtime. There was always something going on, or
Oh,
four
no,
things
no,
going on.
I was, I still had my brokerage. And what happened is I became my own broker dealer, which was one of the few women-owned broker dealers at the time in the country. And so then after I left Kidder Peabody, I found American Classic Financial. And then I had an office in Swarthmore, and then one in Center City in the castings building, which I developed. And developed the castings, which is historically certified historically with a plaque in the front, and is just a super building. And that was very exciting.
So did you feel when you were doing those restorations, or you were taking these old historic buildings and turning them into condominiums, right?
Yes.
You were part of a sort of a revitalization of Philadelphia's central area?
Yeah, revitalization of America, because it was close to the water, and then it was in Old City, which is the oldest part of Philadelphia. And it was to me, very exciting to be walking with my 4-inch heels on the cobblestones and the brick pavements.
And I'm guessing that dealing with historic buildings, you probably also had occasion to have great conversations with people about the history of Philadelphia.
Yes, yes, and I would go to the, I think, Tuesday morning meetings, the development committee meetings, because everything had to be approved by the Old City community and the development committee at that time. And ironically enough, recently, I don't know how, for years I wasn't getting their mail or anything, and about 8 months ago, I get a notice that they have a mailing and they're sending out, and so I'm now on the mailing list of the Old City community again, which was surprising to me, because it's been quite a while since I actually lived down in Philadelphia, because I lived in the chocolate factory for many
Right,
years.
right. And I imagine that you still have a lot of fond regard for the community that is developed around those buildings that you helped to renovate.
Yes, especially the castings was the largest one. It was 62 condominiums, and in the book I mention one of the women who lives there was talking about it, and how much she enjoyed living in something that just wasn't just a small little place that was being developed, most people that developed buildings, and even today, usually put them in this, what I call cracker box, small units. And I wanted something that was open and a loft apartments. And that was new at that time when I started in a building in the 80s.
Yeah, so you took the historic character and allowed it to be enjoyed by the people who were living inside the units that you built.
Yes, yes.
Now, go ahead.
It's still one of the castings in some of the other places, and the chocolate factory. I patented the name, and they love it. And they in fact, the chocolate factory, they have a party, I think either Memorial Day or 4th of July on the street every year.
Now, you were saying something to me about having some of the actual molds or something from the castings.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So the story continues for you, eh? Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, well, in the castings, particularly since it was such an old building, there was one part of it that I climbed up the stairs and found all these old molds and sewer covers and records and invoices. And I then converted them into plate pieces that people could have. And I would go to my, on Sundays, sometimes I would have these pieces of moldings. I would have gotten mirrors or glass to put inside them. And Sharon, who's on this line, we would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go down to somewheres in New Jersey or North Philadelphia or somewheres else. And we would sell these wonderful pieces of memories, really large wall pieces that were great, and people still have them. I still have some too.
So, what was the hardest part of this book? Was there a chapter or a section that was hardest for you to write?
I have to think about that, but I think one of the hardest parts was about my uncle Emil, and he was the closest. I felt so close to him, and we related on so many different levels, even though he lived in California at the time. But that was a very hard, I guess, if at all, hardest chapter. I had to rewrite it 1 or 2 times or more, perhaps. Yes. And
Because just thinking about his impact on your life and
yes,
how to share that, how to capture it.
right. And feeling the loss, which I still feel. Yes, he was very close to me, and I felt very close to him always. And he was a maverick, very much so.
I'm struck when I look, reflect on your story, because then in early 2000 you attempted to try to start a web property. I just feel as though your headline, your subtext of or subhead of Memoir of an Unstoppable Woman. It's like if something came into your head, you'd give it a shot. You still do.
Yes, yes, I do. I realized in early 2000s that seniors were being discriminated against, and people were taking advantage of them. And so I started My Seniors, which was a website for seniors and for everyone. And eventually, after I put it together, and the first thing that when I called someone to get some suggestions or ask about it, he said to me, "Seniors don't use the website, Florence. What are you talking about?" Well, of course, it didn't stop me. And I subsequently went on to change the name, because I thought the name seniors, especially then, was derogatory, and people wouldn't necessarily be drawn to the website. And so what we did, we had wonderful information. We had a whole cookbook. We had, I guess, about 200 different pages and or more. It was really wonderful. In fact, I guess of all the disappointments, and there are quite few too, not having to close Silver Planet was difficult for me, because I funded it mostly myself, almost entirely myself. And it got to the point that it was staying too long with it. But today I find that there is still need for some of the same ideas that I had for the website. And I'm hoping perhaps to include some of those ideas in Under the Hat, the website that I just started.
Well, we still hear the debate about whether to call ourselves seniors at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. So it's an ongoing challenge. One of the things I think is that as we've had longer, healthier lives in the main, statistically speaking, we can put off discussing or thinking about the idea of being an elder, which is unfortunate because I think that, as you said at the beginning of this interview, we have, as older Americans, experience and reflection. One of the things that we just touched on here, that failure is a big part of life, and as is loss, and coming to terms with that is something that we have to do if we're going to move forward. You mentioned Generation Z. Are there any particular audiences that you hope will read your book?
I already, well, initially, my editor, Mie, who wonderful, said, well, there's nobody, if you're looking to inspire the Z generation, we don't have anything to try out with, anyone to read something. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I found some people, and my young assistant, I think she's on somewheres, is in the Z generation, and someone else, another person who was doing some work for me, is 21 years old. She had never had a book club. She never went to a museum. And all of a sudden, or suddenly, she's reading and interested. And so you think that they're only interested in the website, or they're only interested in social media. And I think there's a lot more that they can gain from the book, especially in the chapters on courage and ageism, that really don't necessarily pertain to me in my background, or just interesting, I think, for them to be inspirational, to look ahead and not be disturbed or depressed if they don't succeed in something. You know, there's always the next day. It's not like you have to stop trying or stop living.
That's a great point for us to break and ask if there are any questions or comments from those of you who are online here. Just unmute yourself if you have something you want to say, or wave at me and I'll try to help you figure out how to unmute yourself.
I had a question, Florence. The real estate work that you did in Philadelphia, I mean, how did you manage to finance it? And was it a struggle to try and get that initial financing? Because that's always a big component, and at that time would have been very male dominated and very curious about that.
Well, the chocolate factory, the first one was about 3 or 4 members of a group, small, my family, and it was not very expensive, and then we sold it, and that person built it. The chocolate factory was the second one, and I had gotten a loan from a small bank, from a regular savings and loan bank. And that ran into a lot of trouble because I was building loft apartments, and the loft apartments weren't known. Eventually, I had to rent them at the chocolate factory, and then then I was able to sell them. On the other properties, I can recall having to go to the bank asking for a loan to answer that question, Chris. And I went with the young man who was my assistant at the time. And the whole interview was the person was talking to him. And I still recall that. It was pretty interesting. And he was obviously younger than I, but that didn't make any difference. And he was talking, well, guess what? I never went back to that bank anymore. That's for sure. And then I had two partners in the other in the chocolate, not in the chocolate factory, in Classic Quartz and in
Castings.
the castings, yes, yes. And then I actually wanted to buy another property. I have that in the book. I don't know if you got to that part yet, but the man said to me, I walked into the building, and this was an old city, and and he said, this is what I want. I said, oh, I'll buy it. And we shook hands, and I walked away thinking, okay, I will come back with the financing and the and how I would pay for it and so forth. And when I walked back the next day, he said, oh, I sold it to a New York broker. And I was beside myself, as you could imagine. And I thought, okay. And he said, no, I sold it. Well, what happened? The New York broker never closed the deal, and that property was on sale. And it took many years for that property to get redeveloped.
You just let
That
it,
was on Arch Street.
you just let it sit there and let him suffer. That's good.
She's asking if you just let him sit there with the property, or had you moved on to something else? Was it Schadenfreude, or was it?
What? I'm sorry.
Why didn't you go back and buy it?
No, I didn't need to deal with him. I felt that after all, to me, if you shake hands with someone, I guess I'm very old fashioned, and you conclude and you shake hands on a deal, that's a deal. Of course, as Stefan will say, and as my daughter and the lawyers will say, it doesn't mean anything today. It must be in writing. And of course, then that can always be disputed too. We know that, yes.
But you were talking earlier, you sort of tossed me aside when I was saying, did you face any particular obstacles as a woman? But you've named several in the course of this conversation. And I think that, a handshake between two men might have turned out differently. We don't know, but it does seem as though your persistence and perseverance when facing obstacles is really kind of the understory of this. It looks like Mie has also joined. Welcome to you. Your praises have been sung already by Flo.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Cindy, please unmute yourself. We'd love to hear you.
There we go. Flo, I've heard that the process of getting your book published can be excruciating, like worse than eating a bowl of live crickets. How bad was it? How hard?
I don't think getting it published, first of all, I knew nothing about it. So without Mia directing me or showing me actually what it was, I don't know how I would have succeeded in getting it published. And the whole idea of self-publishing is a misnomer. People, if you want your book to be self-published and you want to show it to your family, you write it, you get it printed, you take it to a printer around the corner, and it's in print and it's bound, and that's self-publishing. If you want your book to be distributed, that's a different story altogether. Now you have to try to see, well, who do you want it to go to? Who do you think it can meet? What needs can you fulfill? And also, then you have to start a marketing plan. Well, that's a whole different story, and that's why I'm here. So please ask any questions. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, well, we would have you here, marketing or not, Flo, because we're very grateful to have you as a part of the center and this community. So it's an interesting book. It's also, I would say, it has sections. There are parts that are very autobiographical, and then there are a few things like you talk about the chapter on courage, or your some of your reflections about life that are kind of in a different tone, but they're in the course of the storytelling. And then you end with just some reflections after the point, which you mentioned to me as we were beginning. You reminded me that you had been writing some things maybe during COVID that you sent to the senior center that you were sharing with people, and they kind of make up the end of the book a little bit.
Yes. There usually get an idea about 3 o'clock in the morning and find some place to pick it, take and write. And one of the interesting things about writing, I feel, because this is the first book I've actually published, is that everyone reads very differently. And so that is surprising to me. I usually get a book and read it from front to back and look at the chapters or the index first. And this is something that I find from the reactions that I've gotten from people, that's not how a lot of people read at all. So that's sort of me thinking, well, maybe there's something that I should talk about on that level, and maybe I'll start another book. I don't know. I'll look at that.
Sharon, you were mentioned earlier. I see you've unmuted. Do you want to say a word or two?
I'm sorry.
I thought Sharon might want to say something.
I am very proud of my sister-in-law. What can I say? She's quite a lady.
Are you surprised that she would have done something like write a memoir like this?
No, I'm not surprised at anything she would do. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. Yeah, go ahead.
She's done some wonderful things, and I'm very proud.
Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Stefan, I see you've taken yourself off mute. Do you want to chime in here?
I just want to know what kind of dog that was that you put in your car and drove around with in the evening. What was that dog?
A Weimaraner.
I thought it was a nice big one. Did you take him into the meetings?
No,
Okay.
no. No.
He was a patient dog who hung out. And Weimaraners are pretty calm dogs, as I recall, aren't they? I mean, they like to exercise, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I actually have a real question. So everybody's heard about, I mean, it's actually a term, the Philadelphia lawyers, right? They're supposed to be tough as nails, and aggressive as they come. Did you mix it up much with lawyers during your career, either in the securities fields or in the real estate fields?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that all, Stefan.
Yeah, I'm just curious about your experience. Did you ever have to deal with situations where you were involved in lawsuits, or you got involved with your company that was involved in lawsuits, and how that went for you?
Oh,
I'd love to hear if you were ever a witness.
If I was ever what?
A witness.
No, I was never a witness. But
Bless you.
one of the stories that I omitted in the book, I did purchase a property, and the city of Philadelphia actually gave me a loan, which was the first time ever that the city had ever issued a loan to an individual company, and I was going to build a Hampton Homes there, and then the interest rates went, and that was also in Old City, and the interest rates went up to about 18% or something, and of course there wasn't enough money to even build and develop the building, and Hampton Homes backed out of the deal. So that entailed quite a bit of dealing with attorneys. One of the attorneys turned out to be not so notable, let's leave, or maybe too notable. He was then taken off the board or the bar, but he represented me for a time with that property, which I had for a long time, that I wasn't able to develop. That property was developed about 4 years ago, and they found, when they started to dig down, they found maybe 20 or some bodies down there that had been there for how many years, because don't forget, this is Old City, Philadelphia.
Oh my gosh, Florence, I think there's a whole other book there.
Well, I'm not quite ready yet.
I think you should start writing scripts for a movie or maybe a series on television. You can do that.
Well, we'll see. I'm just starting this, and it's exciting, to see you all here and being supportive of me. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, I don't know whether, this is not in the schedule, but I see, since Mie is here and you were talking a little bit about the process of editing and how useful that was. If you have anything that you might throw in, if you're willing to, about the process of putting together a project like this and helping somebody like Flo try to distill her thoughts.
Yes, well, yeah, I wasn't expecting to speak today, but thank you. Yes, I work professionally as a freelancer, basically as a book producer. So I'm an editor and a graphic designer, both, and I help authors like Flo self-publish, kind of go through the entire process. Although I have to admit, I usually edit a manuscript that's already written. And in this case, it was partially written, but not fully formed. So it was a little bit different than what I usually do, working with her to really flesh out the stories. She has no end of just incredible experiences and insight. And also, I think, values that she really wants to transmit to the next generation of readers. And so it was interesting working with her to try to sort of put that all together, and to mesh that with her incredible life story. Absolute honor. I have to say, it was a lot of work. I think Florence often she got impatient with me, perhaps, when I asked her endless questions of interviewing her about just so many different details. But I think I can safely say that we were both really pleased with the result. And I'm just really proud of her for, having the tenacity and the dedication to put this book out and her story, because I do think there are many amazing life lessons there in the book that hopefully many readers to come will learn from and be inspired by.
Well, thank you for graciously answering the question, and thank you, Flo, for spending the time with us today. Really appreciate everybody's contribution.